Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you today? My name is Fada Maliti. I'm the Vice President of the Autism Society of the San Francisco Bay Area. And today I'm really pleased to introduce Steve Keisman. Steve's actually with us by popular demand. Steve wears two hats. He's the Senior Vice President of Identifor. Identifor is the first world's game-based career assessment tool. It was specifically designed for young adults with autism. And his second hat is he's also an independent transition consultant who specializes in neurodiverse employment. Steve's going to talk to us today about what the landscape is out there for employment for people across the spectrum. And can't wait to hear all about it. So, oh, sorry, housekeeping. I forgot the housekeeping. Okay, guys, so this, everyone that's watching right now, you guys are all on mute. If you have questions, please type into the question bar and I will be monitoring those and being able to ask Steve that. Also, if you're listening via audio, you can send your questions in to info@sfautismsociety.org. And then it will be recorded as well. So once this is all over, you'll get a notification and it will be up on the screen and you can watch it at any time and share it. So without further ado, Steve, take it away.
Thanks very much. Hello to everybody. First, I want to thank Fada and of course Jill Escher for inviting me to tell you a little bit about the work that I do and to tell you a little bit about my perspective as far as autism at work is concerned. First, a little bit about me. But before I continue, I also want to say that if my heavy Brooklyn accent gets in the way, or if I'm speaking too fast because I have a lot of enthusiasm and I have a lot of information to share, please put up your hand and Fada will let me know. Anyhow, here's a little bit about me. I don't need to go down my resume too much, but you could see that I have quite a bit of experience in this exact field. And 31 of my 33 years with the New York City Department of Education was in inclusive education and in career readiness types of programs for people with and without disabilities. I now have a total of 45 years in the field, and I do a host of other kinds of things as well. But the most important part of my resume that I just want to underscore is that I'm not a civilian. I'm not a backbencher who wears just a blue rubber bracelet in April. I live this because I have two children, two grown children, who both have cognitive disabilities. One of them, who, if I have some time, I'll tell you about, who is pretty seriously impacted. So let me continue by saying that here are some of the things that you're going to learn today, hopefully by the end of my discussion. So we're going to talk about the underlying situation of how we got here, the importance of work for people on the spectrum, what's the starting point that we need to look at, what are some of the barriers to meaningful employment? And there are a lot of barriers, and we're going to talk about as many of them as I could fit in today. And if at any time there isn't, your answers aren't being answered in a way that you would like, or you'd like more information, feel free, please reach out to me and I'll be more than happy to continue the conversation. We'll be talking about all different kinds of things from all different areas, because I think that the more that you know about this, about what's out there, the more you'll be able to prepare your child or young adult for future employment. So let me start off, and one of the things that most people know about me is that I have a pretty good memory for reciting different kinds of quotations and data points and things to make my point in whatever topic I'm talking about. Rather than give you tons of statistics right now, the most important statistic I want you to walk away with, or I want you to think about during my presentation today, is that just in the area of autism, it's expected that between 500,000 and 750,000 children today will become adults over the next 10 years. And believe it or not, between 84 and 92% of all people on the spectrum will be un or underemployed. I like to unpack things and kick it off by saying that all families have the same hopes and dreams for all of their children. They want the best for them, and they want them to have every kind of advantage that's possible. But all too often, students, when they leave school, who are on the spectrum or who have other kinds of neurodivergences, once they leave school, they're just unprepared for real life. No matter how many years and no matter how many supports and accommodations that they had, most of them end up watching TV or doing all different kinds of things on the computer or at home that are not very engaging or meaningful. And lots of them are getting into trouble more and more these days. So this is something that really needs to be looked at when we talk about the landscape of how to help people who are on the spectrum in finding neurodiverse employment. In addition to that, so many of our kids just at the age of 18, or if they age out at 22, they just graduate to the couch. They're playing Minecraft, they're playing Fortnite, they're doing all kinds of things that are rather unproductive. One of the things I like to point out, just to underscore how important employment is for people who are neurodiverse, a colleague and a friend of mine is also and a collaborator of mine. You might have heard her speak at the last ASA meeting at Stanford a few months back. She says that unstructured time, when somebody just has too much access to technology, they oftentimes get into unlawful behaviors. And one of the things that she always points out is that parents put themselves in jeopardy when they say, you're on that screen too long, it's not productive, get off, and they cajole the child, they punish the child, they threaten the child. And at the end of it, if there's nothing that's going to be productive, that's going to be substituted for that screen time, that's when there are a lot of really big problems. And that's Laurie Sperry. I don't know if anyone was at her talk that Dr. Sperry gave, but she is an authority in this exact area. So what's the starting point? How should we look at this? I do lots and lots of focus groups, and I always ask, what's a purposeful life for a person who has an intellectual disability? And after doing dozens and dozens of these are the ones that always come out at the top of my list. But the one that's always number one, except once or twice it was number two, is a great job. So you'll always hear people saying that I want housing that's going to be, great housing for my kid. I want them to have lots of friends, a community that's welcoming to them, and all of the other kinds of stuff, because that's what a meaningful life is. But at the end of the day, the one that almost always comes up at the top is having a great job. So what's a great job? Because a job is not the same as valuable work. And that's a point that I always want to underscore, because meaningful employment is not only a basic human right for all people, but it doesn't matter if that person is without or with a disability. So what's the encouraging news? Is there encouraging news in all of this? Yes, there is. The encouraging news has to do with job creation. Right now, there's a very, very tight labor market that you probably keep hearing about, and most or many of those positions are entry-level vacant positions right now. In addition to that, as many of you probably know, it is much more difficult for our cohort to receive entitlements like Social Security, Medicaid, and other government support. It's becoming much more difficult for them to receive. And also, employers are seeing bottom line benefits for the first time. So that's all great news, that more people are looking for jobs and more employers are looking for workers. And probably the best news that I could share today is that of all disabilities, people with autism are the most in demand for employment. And I'll touch upon that in a minute, but keep that in mind because that is good news. However, the flip side of that and the frustrating part, the challenging part is, and let me just stop for a minute and say this caveat: there's honor in all work, but what if the 5 F's just aren't enough? What's the 5 F's? Filing, folding, food, flowers, and filth. Those are the 5 most common areas that people on the spectrum are put into as far as employment goes, even if they can qualify to do more. And the reason for that is because of the discovery process. It's excruciating difficult to figure out what somebody on the spectrum is good at. It's very, very difficult to know what are their skills, abilities, and interests. And I like to use this iceberg as a way of thinking about it because there's very little that we usually know about somebody who is on the spectrum. Something that really, really gets to me each time I hear this is the rhetoric du jour. Everybody says that their program or their approach is person-centered planning and strength-based assessment. And when I ask them to explain that to me, not just to give me, those buzzwords, they either give me gibberish for the most part, and if not gibberish, then they themselves aren't even sure what that even means. But what I want to mention to you is that the reason why the discovery process is so difficult is because the traditional assessment that we use now is very, very difficult when we're using it with people on the spectrum. And that is because of the sheltered existence most of them live, their limited experiences, they're not very self-aware. Approximately 34% either are nonverbal or communicate differently. We can't capture the same information from my 2 daughters as I was able to from my son. We weren't able to look at his PSATs and his SAT scores and see what his friends and he were into, what his hobbies were, and ask him if he had a dream job. And very, very difficult is that all of these assessment tools are not bias free. All too often, the aide, the transition coordinator, the person at the regional center, caring teacher, or the parent might be pushing the child and saying, no, that's not what this means. You want to choose this answer, not that. And one of the biggest barriers is standardized tests. And those barriers are huge because Scantrons, as you probably know, are a disaster. So that stands as a big, big barrier as well. And there's also one other thing I like to point out. What about the middle impacted, nonverbal, non-computer, STEM-oriented young adult with autism? They have value too, but all too often they're neglected, or everybody is looking for that cohort. I like to say that the greatest weakness of IDEA is transition, and it's the most litigious part of the IEP these days in at least 15 states, because people are saying, hey, we've spent all this money, we've done everything that you've told us, we've gone to every IEP meeting, and at the end of the day, our child merely graduated to the couch, especially those young adults that have more significant needs. Until the day comes that a meaningful job is part of the IEP, this is probably going to continue to be an extremely weak part of the IDEA law. So that's really something that I think we should talk about. I'd like to expand on that part in this talk as well. So now the question becomes, how do we match job seekers with autism to the different companies that are looking for workers? How do we make that match? Keep in mind that as of last month, there are nearly 7 million available jobs And just yesterday, the Department of Labor mentioned that the US private sector added 291,000 jobs just last month alone. Does that mean that none of those jobs or a handful of those jobs are appropriate for our young adults? I argue no. I argue we need to find a way that we can match a job seeker that has certain set of abilities and interests to jobs that are out there. So how do we do that? We do that by using an assessment tool, but we do that through assessment. How can we do the assessment properly with the tools that we currently have? Those seem to get in the way of the discovery process. And that's the way and the reason that Identifor came about. So Identifor is the world's first computer game-based career assessment tool that was designed specifically for people with autism by two parents who have a son on the spectrum. And Identifor has three dimensions: career direction, meaningful employment, and 24/7 support. Let me first start with the career direction. And this is how it works. Young adults or anybody who can play games, either on their phone or on their device, tablet, or on their computer, just plays different engaging games. And we know that people on the spectrum oftentimes love playing games. And for that reason, it never becomes tedious or difficult to get different kinds of data for someone on the spectrum because they love to play these games. And what's going on the back end is we're measuring three different areas that we find to be extremely important in successful employment. The first one is executive functions. We're also measuring multiple intelligences, as well as gamifying the John Holland career code, the reset code. And I'm going to speak very briefly about each one of these to give you an idea of the information that we're collecting on the back end. The first is executive functions. You probably heard about that a lot these days if you're on top of the information in the world of autism and work. And one of the areas that is so important in employment is for somebody to be able to know what's expected of them, to do it as efficiently as possible, and to make sure that the work is delivered in the way that it was requested. The second has to do with multiple intelligences. And you might have heard about Howard Gardner out of Harvard and his frames of mind that he talked about. But I use one brief example before so that we can move ahead. And that is, if somebody is fantastic at mathematical computation, but he or she sits in a cubicle all day in an accounting firm, and they happen to be a person who is an outdoors type of person, they're not going to do well and probably fail at that job that requires them sitting in that cubicle all day. And the third thing that we gamify is the John Holland Reset Career Code. There are 720 different personality patterns that it figures out for you. And one of the most exciting things is, and one of the reasons that we use it is not only is it effective, but it's also the only tool to this day since 1938 that's been used by the US Department of Labor for career assessment. So if it's good enough for them and for 80 years, then that's certainly something that we feel is good enough for us. Oops, sorry. So while people are playing these different games, we're collecting all this information on the back end, and we're putting it in very graphic form. So in this case, if you take a look, this is executive functions. Now we're able to look at not so much the area of greatest challenge or the deficiency of a person, but now we're able to see where that person has their strength, their relative ability, as well as their comparative ability against everybody who uses these games. So how do we leverage their strength rather than always trying to remediate their deficiency. That's what we're talking about when we put together Identifor. And again, this is for multiple intelligences. Right away, we're able to take a quick look as well as a deep dive into how well a person does in these different areas of multiple intelligences. If you have a look at the bottom, it says percentile for linguistics history. And if you take a look there, what we have is a chart over time that takes a look at how a person does in those specific areas. And the reason that that's important is not to say that a person gets better playing our games, because even if they did, it probably wouldn't be applicable to most other kinds of areas. But what if we're putting in place certain kinds of supports, certain types of accommodations? What if we're making certain kinds of job changes for a person? How do we know if they're working? Well, now we have the data that can support that. And that's why we have the history of a person in those different areas. In addition to that, our dashboard allows us to make specific career suggestions for a person once that dashboard is open. And here you can see what the dashboard would look like. And this is on the Identifor website. We're able to see suggested careers, and not only the suggested career and the percentage of certainty that we have that would be a good fit for the person, but it's hyperlinked to a summary report from the ONET website. And if you don't know ONET online, I encourage everybody who's participating today to have a look at this, because it's really an amazing tool. It's a free tool that's put out by the Department of Labor, and it has an X-ray, if you will, with granular details of almost everything that well over 1,000 job titles would have for a worker in that area. So it has everything from technology skills that a person would need, what are the other kinds of details that the job would entail, what task, and it rates them from highest, most important for them to know, to the lowest. So this is a really, really good tool, and we put this in as part of a hyperlinked, to the different careers that we suggest for a person. So what we're doing is really, really shifting the paradigm. And the way that we're shifting the paradigm is in two different ways. The first one is, it's time that we stop seeing our young people as a collection of their deficits. It's time for us to truly focus on their strengths. The reason I included this slide was to tell you that Michael Phelps, arguably the world's greatest swimmer, he tried 8 or 9 other sports competitively that he didn't really do. He didn't do as well as he thought that he would, no matter how hard he tried, until somebody came along and looked at his body and said, my God, with the way that your body is and with your determination and the way that you handled other stress and adversity, swimming would definitely be an area that would make sense for you. So in addition to looking finally at a person's strengths and not the medical model of what's wrong and what are the deficiencies that person has, in addition to that, this enhances the career discovery process, because of, instead of trying somebody at a different job, not sure if they're going to do well in it or not, or knocking on a door and begging a potential employer to try this person, and usually end up in one of the 5 F's. Now what we're able to do is to take a look and see, how can this person provide value to a company? It's very different to go in and have a conversation with an employer or a potential employer, and it's a big paradigm shift from begging for a job to saying, this person has real abilities and skills that we could demonstrate by showing you their dashboard, and perhaps there's some kind of work that you could give to them that would benefit your bottom line. Make work jobs and jobs that are funded are disrespectful, and it's time that they stop. And that's another reason why Identifor has been as successful, because it helps shift that whole paradigm. Another big area of mine I want to take a few minutes to talk about, because this is something that I really want to just make sure that everybody pays attention to, is all too often we are preparing our children and our young adults for jobs that are not going to be in existence in the next 3 years. How do I know that? I know that because of a lot of the places that I've been visiting and a lot of conversations that I've been having with small and large business owners and operators. Here are some jobs that are jobs that will be sticking around for a while. And there are a lot of different jobs within these jobs, sub-jobs, if you will, within these different areas. And it's something that we need to be thinking about, because, well, let me first tell you about these. These are called Kivas, and this is an Amazon distribution center close to where I live in northern New Jersey. And I have to tell you that that there's nothing that has changed the landscape probably faster than these Kiva robots, and they keep getting better and better. And what they do is they do the order picking in the Amazon distribution centers. And this is called the Bossa Nova. This does a little bit different kind of, this doesn't do the order picking, but this does the inventory control. This does lots of other kinds of things in addition to maintenance work at Walmart, the Bossa Nova. And everybody is starting to use robots of all different kinds, including FedEx. And this is something in suburban, just outside of Orlando, that they're doing experiments with. And I don't know about you, but this is my local supermarket, and they used to have 5 or 6 different cashiers, and now it's down to 1 cashier and a person who stands by all of the many machines that they have to make sure that people learn to do this, and that it's quick, it's cheap, it's faster, it's more accurate, it's more reliable, and there's no discomfort from a person on the job with autism that might have some kind of meltdown or make an innocent comment. And that's the reason why these have become incredibly popular. And the robots are coming. Not just robots, but you've been hearing, I'm sure, all of the different kinds of words like blockchain and big data analytics and bots and machine learning. All of that stuff is coming really, really soon. And just to that point, Amazon has really created a big, big groundswell in this area. And take a look at this statistic and look at the growth in the last few years. Part of the problem is we're training our young people not just to be cashiers in grocery stores, but also in other areas similar to that are going to be replaced by robots and other kinds of automation and artificial intelligence. And part of the problem is that, as you could see here from the president of Amazon Robotics, what he has to say, that the problem solving, common sense, and thinking on their feet is really the area that so many of our young adults are really their greatest challenge. The areas of doing the job are not the ones that are really the ones where our kids usually shine. And it's really becoming an arm wrestle in a way. And I'm asking everybody here to think about, what are we teaching our young people for? What are we preparing them for? Are we preparing them for jobs that are not going to exist in a few years? I say that this will not end well unless we start preparing our teens for future jobs. And here's a chart that just came out last week I wanted to share with you. Actually, this has been out I came across it last week, but it's been out since last year from information that was between 2016 and 17, and it's even increased more than that. If you take a look, if we really do a deep dive into the most common jobs held by people who are on the spectrum or who have other intellectual disabilities, what you'll see here is most of those jobs are jobs that are going to be replaced by automation and computers. In addition, so the first part of Identifor is in the career assessment using games. But in addition to that, what we also did was we included several different situational analysis types of surveys. The first one is the George Mccloskey Executive Function Survey that I want to tell you a little bit about. And the way that it works is that 33 questions are asked of every person who's either on a child study team or who's on any kind of, who's been assigned to working with a young person, and the young person themselves, if they're able to handle it. And it could be anybody. It could be a teacher, it could be an employer, it could be a school bus driver, anyone who knows, it could be a parent, anyone who knows the person. And what we ask them to do is rate the child in all of these different areas. Once they do that on their phone or on a computer, tablet, all of that information is then sent and aggregated to the team leader. And that person in graphic form will receive the information and we'll be able to have a conversation in addition to the person's dashboard to talk about what are the areas where the person has strengths and what are the areas where they still have some challenges. And what I always say is let's look at the divergences so that we could ask somebody if they're the only one or just two people rather than the rest, see something one way than everybody else. What is it that you see that maybe we can learn from? Oops. We also put together for Autism Speaks their community skills assessment tool, and it's exactly the same, it works exactly the same way, where we're able to ask different kinds of questions, to have a perspective from all people who know that person, to see how is it that, how do they handle issues that have to do with health and safety, personal finance, leisure and recreation, and all things of that nature. Something else that I want to mention to you is, so what happens if we find a great job for somebody and it looks like a terrific match, but there are no jobs available for that person? It really isn't going to be too helpful. Well, we recently partnered with a company called Wrangham Associates, and they have a source-able platform that looks at people who are on the spectrum. And depending on their dashboard and depending on their abilities and where they live, they try to match them to a job that makes sense for them. So that's another aspect of Identifor as well. I have time to quickly tell you a little bit about my daughter, Melanie. Neither one of these are Melanie's. These are former colleagues of hers, but I think her story is, you might find it to be an interesting one. That's Melanie right there. That's my daughter. She's 23 right now. And when I was first approached to be the face of the company for Identifor, I came home all giddy and said to Melanie, hey, Mel, you have to, I want you to check this out because I'd like to work for the company, but it has to work before I quit my job that I have and go work for this new company. And she said, okay, what do you have to do? And I said, sit down. And I put her at the computer and I showed her what she had to do to start playing these games. And after a few minutes, she gave up. She said, that's it. I hate the computer. I don't want to play these games. And my wife and I cajoled her. We tried everything that we could think of. She still wasn't interested. And then I came up with the two magic words. And then she finally listened and she said, wow. And she became motivated. And she said, Cheesecake Factory, I mean, I can have anything I want. I said, you could have anything you want and take home an extra piece of cheesecake once we get an open dashboard. And that's just as a side note, It's not a one-off kind of tool. What Identifor is something that you must play a certain number of times. And once we collect information from the different games that a person plays, only then do we get an open dashboard. And Melanie kept pecking at the keyboard and kept playing these games until we finally got that open dashboard. And what happened was we saw, believe it or not, that Melanie, her strengths were in the areas that had to do with computers, but not just data entry and not programming, but believe it or not, it had to do in areas such as database management. And when we saw her executive functions and we saw some of the stuff that we never knew about her, we were able to convince the hospital vocational rehab program here in New Jersey that she was involved in for her to take a 1 day a week, full day computer training program. She had an aide that was with her. And what Melanie was able to do during that time is to learn Microsoft Office Suite. And in fact, she also became certified as a Microsoft Office specialist. And this was something that just shocked my wife and I. We had no idea that she would take to this like a fish, like a fish in water. After just about 2.5 weeks, she was typing 42 words a minute with no mistakes. My wife is a high school teacher. She was doing all of her PowerPoints and newsletters for her colleagues. I hate Excel. She was doing all of my Excel work. And I show you this brochure of Melanie, or I show you this brochure of the program that Melanie was in, because everybody is doing one of the 5 Fs on both sides of this brochure, except Melanie, who was doing actual database management and file management for different divisions in 2 hospitals. So this is something we had no idea about. And it was only through those Identifor games that I mentioned before that we were able to get that kind of information to try this. And as a result of that, Melanie was hired by a seminar and a conference company that helps put them on and plans and does all of those things. Unfortunately, they're too far from where we live, so Melanie only works on an as-needed basis, or she does a lot of the work out of the house. They never once hired a person with a disability before, but they honestly needed somebody who had the skills in Microsoft Office that Melanie did, and she works in many, many different areas with them and with a few other places near where we live. So that's Melanie's story. And I don't have time to go into this now because I usually do an entire presentation just about the social emotional skills, the hidden curriculum and things of that nature that a worker needs in the workplace. So I just want to talk about that and go through it really quickly because we don't have all the time that we really need to cover this, but I want you to understand how all of this fits together. There are lots of obstacles that get in the way of employment. There are. So what we need to always be cognizant of is what are what I call the pain points and what are the curb cuts that are needed to help a person be more successful and to work around those different obstacles so that they can do a better job and be accepted at the workplace. There are 3 R's of transition. There's relationships, there's regulation, responsibility. And really quickly, I'm not able to see my dashboard. I'm seeing a picture right now. So, I'm not able to see my screen. I'm seeing you, Frida.
Okay, I see the 3 R's of transition.
Perfect. Do you see self-regulation?
I see self-regulation, yes.
Excellent, excellent, thank you. So in the area of self-regulation, these are some of the areas that a person has to have really good command over. And there are ways of handling these different areas before the person ever steps into a workplace to make sure that they're going to be as successful as possible once they do start a job. The same thing with responsibility. How do they handle their downtime? How are they able to, do they need constant prompting? What are their problem solving skills like? And the same exact thing in their relationships. Do they have, what's their personal hygiene like at work? If somebody has awful personal hygiene, or as an example, a person is unable to use a public bathroom, they're not going to keep their job very long. So we can't just look at getting jobs in isolation. We have to look at what are the other areas that need to be worked on so that a person could be not just hired, but successful in that job as well. So you hear about soft skills a lot. And these are the areas of the soft skills that HR professionals usually talk about. And these are the areas that all too often our folks on the spectrum have some difficulty and challenges with. The easiest part of employment is the job itself. And it's usually no more than 12, 13 steps. But that's not where job loss comes in play. It's usually in the social and navigation aspects of the job. The other area, the other problem is many times the job is taught not in the natural environment. It's only the job skills are taught, but not in job context. And that's something that really should be addressed as well. The same thing with areas like hidden curriculum and other areas that come into play, work ethic, teamwork. Those are the kinds of things that need to be looked at as well. The same thing with adaptive behaviors. And I mentioned the personal hygiene before, but there are many of them. If somebody is, they don't know how to maintain their personal space, or they're correcting other people, or they're using their cell phone inappropriately, constantly asking for help, not taking their medication, obviously they're not going to do well at their job and will probably lose the job if that continues. There are many other obstacles that get in the way, and these are also areas that we really need to look at in addition to the assessment tools and the discovery process. But if somebody has a very rigid routine and behavior and they're put into a job in which that's not important, that could be just one area that could really be troublesome for that person. And some of the other areas as well. So the more that we're able to determine what those challenges are for a person, then we're able to do our best to mitigate or to work around those different obstacles and challenges. One of the other areas, and again, this is just going to be one slide coming up, and I usually talk about this for an entire hour, but I like to talk about the way that Hollywood has portrayed and reinforced stereotypes of people on the spectrum. Before Rain Man came out, before the movie came out, hardly anyone even knew about autism. And more there are TV shows and characters and things like that that are more available in popular culture right now. But not everybody is Sheldon Cooper. Not everybody is the good doctor. Not everybody is the cute young man who's able to find the clue in a quirky way that nobody else was able to find. Where are women? Where are older people? Where are people with differences when they're portrayed? And especially, where are people who are more impacted or people who are not exceptional in the STEM areas? Because keep in mind that the STEM area folks is a tiny percentage of the spectrum, but those are the ones that you would probably agree get the most attention when it comes to Hollywood. And that's part of the problem for somebody who isn't in that cohort when they go looking for jobs. So I wanted to point that out. Let me move ahead. So what good is a perfect job match? If the boss says to Mary or to Jimmy or to whomever, is come back, hey, you did a great job, come back in 20 minutes from your break, and that person doesn't come back until next Tuesday, how long do you think they're going to keep their job? Not very long. So this leads into talking about the next part of Identifor. So we also have something that's called the Identifor Companion. And I'm going to introduce to you Abby. But let me just tell you real quickly about a little bit about the company that made Identifor, and that the company that was responsible for the companion piece of Identifor. And we not only have we won awards for this artificial intelligence product that we have, it's super, super sophisticated. Our first iteration, and now we're on our third, but the first one had more lines of code, of computer code, than the original space shuttle. It's super sophisticated. And this is Abby. And what Abby is able to do is act like a 24/7 support, or a life coach for somebody, if you will. The more a person uses it, the more she gets to know them, and the more helpful she becomes. And there are different features. I want to just tell you about some of them. She answers questions, just, because it's a live person, she's able to answer questions that you may have, well over 1,000 questions that could be in areas that have to do with stuff like, I haven't gotten paid in 2 weeks. What should I do? There's somebody knocking at my door who I don't know. What should I do? How do I make pasta? How do I make tacos? What does TGIF stand for? And things of that nature. She's able to answer those questions. In addition to that, there are different modules that address all of the needs a person has during the day, and it's all revolved around a robust calendar. But we have a money management module that's a virtual wallet based on how much money a person has in their wallet. What's the denomination of the coins and bills? When they go to spend that money, it'll tell them exactly how much to give based on what was put into their wallet, what was entered into the app as far as their wallet is concerned. Our weather module is icon driven. So like my daughter Melanie will say, Dad, it's 47 degrees. And I say to her, is that good or bad? And she says, it's 47. I said, what should I wear? She says, I don't know. So we have icons that show what you should wear to make that part easier. And medication, 67%, approximately 67% of all people on the spectrum have some kind of medical, some kind of prescription medication they're required to take. That's a huge area of job loss when somebody is not compliant with their medication. And this is something that's very, very robust system that we put into our app as well. So again, this sits on a phone or on a tablet and guides the person throughout the day. Person can also go to the games portion of this as well, and they can play the Identifor games to get even more information. So there are other things like maps and Wikipedia, wiki information that could be accessed as well. And all of this is around a very robust calendar. So Abby can remind the person to take their medication, or to stop playing Minecraft, or get ready for work, or come back from a break. And she can do that either by coming on the screen and telling a person that they need to move ahead, or she can do the same thing either by making a phone call to them or sending them a text as well. Work experience. Yep.
I want to leave some time for Q&A because we got a bunch of questions. So if you could just wrap it up in the next. All right, awesome.
I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. Thank you. I just want to stress the importance of work. This is Dr. Paul Shattuck, great guy at Drexel University. You could read this, the same thing with Temple Grandin, both of them, the importance of work. The earlier, the better. It doesn't even matter exactly what that work is, as long as a person can get that kind of routine. There's lots of other things to keep in mind as we go ahead through this and trying to get somebody job ready. We need to start with specific outcomes. If we have information like the kind that Identifor can provide, we can then work backwards and have specific goals and objectives in a person's IEP or in their work plan, and we can practice those as best as possible, practice those skills in the real world in a natural environment. And just real quickly, I want to mention two more huge roadblocks. The first one, that some of you may not know about, is what's called Section 1619B. And essentially what that is, it's a Medicaid eligibility detail that sets thresholds individual to each state. If a person finally finds a job and they earn more than that amount, they lose their benefits. And once the job is over, for whatever reason, they lose the job because of work incompetence, the person who's the supervisor leaves, there's layoffs, there's a recession, the person has to requalify for their benefits. And as I mentioned before, the qualification for benefits has gotten much more difficult. So that's something you really need to take into account and to be cognizant of. And personally, Melanie there were two jobs she was offered that she couldn't take because she would have lost her Medicaid and her DDD. So I mentioned that, and probably even a bigger problem than that is reliable transportation. No job is going to keep a person if they're not going to be able to get there on time every day, or they're going to be waiting at 7 o'clock for somebody to come and pick them up who may never come. So that's something else that really needs to be considered as well. We have lots of enhancements that are coming up with Identifor that I don't have the time really to get into, but one of the things that I do want to mention is this. Everything that I told you about is absolutely free. There's no charge whatsoever for any of the aspects of Identifor. Everything is free. Everything is kept extremely safe and secure and anonymized. So I mentioned that because there's nothing to lose for you to sign up for it and see if it might work for either your program or for your family. Some of the key takeaways is that this is really a huge crisis that's happening that not many people are paying attention to. The problems that arise not having a usable roadmap, as I mentioned before, makes it much more difficult. It's time that we look beyond just jobs that may be not suited for a person. We're talking about worker support, how important it is, and a little bit of how Identifor helps with job matches and support of the person. Last thing I want to mention real quickly, in case you don't know about it, I'm also a consultant to the Stanford University Neurodiversity project, and another project that I'm working on as well with the university is the Neurodiversity Celebration Week. It's March 14th. If you come, everybody's invited. You can check it out online by going to Stanford Neurodiversity Project. On March 14th, just real quick, I wanted to mention that there will be a neurodiversity summit. And if you do come, it's going to be about neurodiversity at work initiative and scaling things up. Very, very exciting. And if you do come, please find me so we could talk more if there's anything you'd like to know more about. And one of the people that will be presenting there is Sienna Castellan. If you don't know who she is, I encourage you to Google her because she is the equivalent of the Greta Thunberg of diversity and empowering kids with differences. Anyhow, now that I got that all in, I'm happy to take any kind of questions that you may have. So let's hope.
Thank you so much. Well, you knocked out about, your screen is gone. Steve, hello?
It's on or it's not? Hello?
It's not on. I can hear you, but it's fine. You knocked out about 3 questions because the first question is how much does it cost? So the cost is free.
Yes, yeah, free is the best price, right?
Free is the best price. Another question was, have you had IEP teams use this app to develop transition plans for students?
Yes, thanks for asking that. It's an important question because one of the things that we take very seriously is the IEP process and Identifor. And if you take a look, once you go to identifor.com, I encourage everybody who is interested in IEP enhancement to take a look at the different resources and suggestions that we make for helping people in the different areas that they may have strengths or challenges. It's all there on our website. So the answer is yes. And I wanted to expand that by saying that we do have lots of information on our website that could be used for the IEP process.
Okay. One other question is how high functioning does your child have to be to use this app?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the one thing I want to make sure everybody hears this is Identifor isn't for everybody. It's certainly for most people, but not for everybody. If somebody can play games, even if you could motivate them to play games, and they can
with cheesecake.
What's that?
With cheesecake.
Right. If you can motivate them with cheesecake or anything else, then you're going to get very, very rich information. In fact, they don't have to be neurodivergent. They could be anybody who can play games at any age. So the answer is a person can play games, then you'll be able to get some kind of data that would be very, very important and helpful.
Great. And how, like, what's the success rate? I mean, since we're talking about like taking in data and the AI and learning and all this stuff, you must have some crazy analytics of, the people that use the app, like how often do they get matched up and what's the success rate?
Yeah, so we're a new company, and we have lots of anecdotal evidence of people who have had tremendous success using Identifor, and either in finding jobs or in being able to validate types of jobs that people thought might be helpful might be a good fit for them, instead of just trying them in a specific kind of job. With this information that we're able to get, we're able to oftentimes validate that as well. I don't have clinical information, but 2 studies are being done at Stanford University to test Identifor's, to measure Identifor's efficacy, as well as in other universities like at Florida International and also at Dartmouth. Until I have that information, I can't give you specifics, but from the different kinds of, as I said before, from the different kinds of emails that I receive and anecdotal evidence, there's a very good level of, there's a very good response of people who have made great use from Identifor.
Okay, and we have to end, but actually I have to read this great comment from a parent. She goes, I'm an parent of a child with autism, and I want to use Abby for myself.
It's great. I not only do I encourage you, but to that point, we have college interns every summer that work with us, and even the non impacted ones, the people who are not on the spectrum, they get incredible success from using it. So I encourage everybody to, if nothing else, use that part of it. It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve, for your time, your expertise.
Thank you.
Your humor around all this. I really enjoyed it. Everyone is asking again will a copy of the recording be put up? It will be put up, and you will get a link if you sign up for the webinar when it's available. And just really quickly to remind you that we have one more webinar coming up in February 27th at 11 to 12 with Mark Gilfix about multi-generational special needs planning. So really cool stuff coming up. Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for watching and joining us. And Steve, I'll see you in March.
I'll see you then. Thank you, everybody. And please reach out to me if I could be of any help to you or your family or the program that you're part of. Thank you.
Thank you.